everybody. Welcome back to another episode of Making History. I'm Katie.
And I'm Brian.
And we are the Hesses. So we're excited to be back for another episode with you guys. And Brian, why don't you start us off with our weekly recap?
Okay. So there's not a ton.
No.
There's not a ton. Last night, and I didn't know this until I woke up because you informed me, but Oliver slept for 8 hours.
Yes.
In one stretch.
It was glorious.
Yeah. Amazing.
Yeah. It was one of those, like, I woke up and I was like, I feel so rested right now. And so I was nervous because I thought it was like 3 a.m.
Right.
Like it normally is when he wakes up the first time. And I was like, oh no, it's going to take me forever to go back to sleep. Oh, well, like I'll just read or something. And I look at the clock and it was 6:15. I was like, what? This is amazing.
That is amazing.
Yeah, it was awesome. And he was super happy too. Well, he went right back to sleep when I went up and I fed him and he went back to sleep again. And then I had to wake him up.
Yeah. For another 2 hours. And then, we woke him up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep. He has been such a champion with sleeping.
Mm-hmm.
It's been amazing.
Yeah. That was good.
Very thankful for a good third kid sleeper.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, all our kids slept good.
They did. We had all good sleepers.
Yeah.
But I feel like, I could be remembering wrong. It just seems like he is a better sleeper earlier than the girls were.
Yeah,
but
it could be.
I don't know if that's actually accurate or not.
Yeah. And then this past Wednesday night, we had a vision service at our church.
We did. It was so good.
It was so fun.
Yeah. It was just so exciting to see, because we've been in a lot of the conversations about like forming the vision and you especially, and so what's going on, but to hear it all like together and presented and seeing, the beautiful, all the slides and pictures of what we're working towards and moving towards, it's just makes it really, really exciting.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. And so we've mentioned our church a few times. If you're listening, I'll put a link in the episode description for our church's website, just in case you're curious about what our church is like.
Yeah.
If you have any interest at all, I'll do that.
Yeah. Good idea.
Yeah, it was really fun. It's, we have been, a lot of stuff we've been planning and kind of building towards, things we want to do in the future. And we've kind of unveiled our new blueprint for what discipleship looks like for our church. And we're really, really excited about that.
Yeah. I think it's going to be just so good for everybody who actually wants to be involved.
Yeah.
Because it's really easy to say like, oh yeah, we want to be discipled, but to actually know what that looks like and actually have like a format for that.
Right.
That's when it actually becomes reasonable and actually like available, because you can say you want to be discipled as much as you want.
Yeah.
But until you know what you want that to look like, there's nothing really to pursue there. So I'm really excited to see where our whole family goes with that in place. I think it's going to be awesome.
Yeah, me too. And we're not satisfied with leaving converts as converts.
Right.
We're not satisfied with like introducing people to Jesus and then letting them kind of find their way. So we wanted to create like a pathway that people can come on board and we can all grow together and continue learning together.
Yeah.
And we're excited. It'll be good.
Yep.
Okay. So for this episode, we're going to keep the conversation going. We may talk a little less about boundaries, but we're definitely going to keep talking about values.
Yep.
Because that plays a big part in this episode's topic. If I were to ask you to think of a place in which their culture stands out to you, what would come to your mind?
Always Chick-fil-A.
Yeah. Always.
Just every time.
Yeah. I've asked that question every year. We used to have a discipleship school, and I would ask that question, and every single year people would have the same answer. Chick-fil-A was always the first thought that came to everybody's mind.
Yeah.
Now, if you don't know what Chick-fil-A is, because I do realize we have a lot of international listeners.
Oh, that's true. Yeah.
If you don't know what Chick-fil-A is, it's a fast food restaurant, and it's better than all the others.
Literally all of the other ones.
Yeah.
Like take anyone and line it up, and this one is at the top.
Yep. Yeah.
For all the reasons too, not just for the food.
Yeah.
For the service,
Yep.
for everything. Yeah.
So the reason we say that their culture stands out is that they have a way of doing things that stands apart from every other restaurant I've ever been to.
Yeah.
Even down to like every time you say thank you to any employee there, their response is my pleasure.
Yep.
Just things like that. And their service is over the top. Every Chick-fil-A employee I've ever talked to just about is extremely kind,
Yeah.
extremely helpful.
Right. And it's like they're happy to be there,
Yes.
which is not common in the fast food industry.
Yeah.
But I feel like most of the time when you go to a fast food place, people are kind of like, you can tell that they're there out of necessity, that they're there because that's their job.
Yep.
But like with people at Chick-fil-A, it's like, it seems like you would be here even if you weren't getting paid.
Yeah.
And like, of course, that wouldn't be the case. But that's how their attitudes are. It seems like it genuinely is their pleasure to serve people
Yeah.
when you're there. Yeah.
Yep. Yeah. So they've got a culture that stands out. Now, that's not to say that other places, will say like a McDonald's, doesn't have a culture.
Sure.
They do have one. It's just that the values that Chick-fil-A has built their culture upon are more obvious than most places.
Right.
There are a lot of restaurants, fast food restaurants even, that I've gone to, and there are some that they've gotten my order wrong to some capacity almost every single time.
Yeah.
And so again, that doesn't mean that places like that don't have a culture. It just means that their values are probably less known.
Sure. They don't necessarily have things that they know that they're working towards.
Right.
They're just kind of there.
Yeah.
And just existing. Yeah.
Yeah. And the thing about culture is every single place has a culture. So every country, every restaurant, every doctor's office, every hotel, every airline,
Right.
every single place of business, anywhere you could go, has a culture. And that includes our homes too.
Yeah.
Every home and every family has a culture. And cultures are built upon primarily the values of those who are in leadership
Sure.
in whatever place that is. So
Right.
every place of business, the people who are at the top are deciding what is important to us as a company, as a business,
Right.
as a place. How do we want to be experienced? What's important to us? And that tends to trickle down. And I can talk about this later too. Intentionality is not necessarily needed in the creating of a culture because culture will be created whether you want it to or not.
Right. Yeah. Yep.
You can't get around it. And that's true because people have values. And because people have values, there are things that they say yes to, and there are decisions that they make
Yeah.
that are based on those values. And because that, you can't escape that. You can't escape the creating of a culture.
Sure. Yep. That makes sense. Yeah.
So here's how I would define culture. Culture is defined as an understanding of this is how we do things here. So in our home, we have a way of doing things.
Right.
Every restaurant you've been to, there is a way of doing things. And that's true everywhere you go. And the temptation for many people when we talk about culture, the temptation is to define culture not by the way we do things, but by the knowledge or desire of what should be.
Right.
And we talked about this a little bit last week, that often our language and our actions don't line up. That our language is a reflection of knowledge of how we want things to be, of desire or what we think things should be like. But culture is not defined by the knowledge or desire of what should be, but by the reality of what is.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense because you can have all the best ideas and the best intentions in creating those values, but it's actually what you're acting upon, the actions that you're taking, the words that you're speaking, and what you're actually doing that creates that culture and brings it into being.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Another place that always stands out is Disney World.
Oh, yes.
If you've never been to Disney World, I can't think of a place that does things with more excellence.
Right. Literally down to like the bathrooms.
Down to every single aspect of your experience at Disney World is excellent.
Yep.
And it's always the case.
And the amount of people that go through there is astounding.
Yeah.
But the cleanliness of it is wild because they've set a value on having a clean, beautiful place.
Yep.
Yeah.
And that value is communicated to employees so that they understand this is how we do things here.
Right.
We don't have trash on the ground. And if you find trash on the ground, it gets picked up immediately.
Yep.
And so you could walk through and you can't find trash because every single employee understands that this is how we do things here. And even customer service is just on another level of any business I've ever communicated with.
Yeah, it is wild.
Yeah.
They are very, very detail oriented and obviously communicate all of those details very well and very clearly so that everybody is on the same page. And if you're not, I would imagine you probably don't work there for very long.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. They have an incredibly high value for excellence and for providing just an amazing experience for every customer, every visitor.
Yeah.
And they were able to do that because of the intentionality that they've set in place from all the way in the top of leadership down to the very bottom employee. And it's understood and it's communicated. Now, again, you don't have to be intentional to create a culture. But if you're not intentional in creating the culture you want, you will unintentionally create something else.
Right.
You'll create a culture, but it just won't be probably what you want it to be.
Yeah, you'll find yourself in a place that looks a lot like most likely chaos at some level and not a lot like what your goals were in creating whatever it was that you created.
Right. So in the interest of pursuing culture, and we talked about this last week, but we need to talk about it again, that it's helpful to have like a model or an example in mind.
Yep.
And so we have looked to Jesus, and we've looked to his kingdom because of anything that we could do, of any person that we could model ourselves after, there's not a better one than Jesus.
Yeah. What more can you ask for?
Because there's no higher aim we could take.
Right. Yep.
There's nothing.
Name something better.
Yeah.
And I'll prove you wrong.
Yeah. There's just no higher aim
Yeah.
for the goal that we've put in place for what we want our home to be like. Because we want, at the end of the day, we want our home to be a place that is a reflection of his kingdom. And of course, in order for that to happen, we have to become people who are reflections of his character and of his nature.
Yeah.
Because culture, the outward manifestation of culture begins with the internal reality that we've become the type of people who value what he values. And so if we want an external manifestation of his kingdom in our home, that first has to take root internally in us.
Right. Yeah. We can't expect to create something that's not already at work in our own selves. Because if we're expecting other people to look like something, we first need to look like that ourselves, or else there is no model for them. You know, you can point them to Jesus, of course, if that's the culture. But if you're like, hey, you act like Jesus, I'm going to act like whoever I want to. Like, I'm going to be all these things, but you need to be loving and kind and patient, but I'm going to be impatient and I'm not going to love well. I'm not going to be nice.
You're describing parents everywhere.
Yeah.
Because parents often have a higher expectation for how their kids should act or should behave than they have for themselves.
Yeah, absolutely.
So parents often expect their kids to have self-control, to be at peace, to be joyful, and to have all these things. And the parents themselves don't have it. Not only do they not have it, but when they don't have it, they often make it the kid's fault.
Right. Oh, yeah.
Well,
absolutely.
if you would act this way, then I could be like this.
Yeah.
And so you're the one making me angry.
Yeah.
You're the one making me impatient. You're the one making me yell.
Right.
Whatever.
Yikes. Yeah. And I feel like you see that so often with respecting too and being respectful.
Yeah.
Because, you know, everybody says like, okay, well, not everybody, a lot you hear often it is said, like the parents like, well, I'm the dad or I'm the mom, so you need to be respectful towards me. But if you're not respectful to your kids, then how do you expect them to return the respect?
Yeah.
If it's not being given to them, there's no model for them to work after. There's no example for them to follow. It's just, hey, do this. And like, first of all, kids probably don't even really know what respect means without seeing it modeled.
Yeah.
And so it's just, you're climbing up the wrong tree.
Kids know how to imitate before they know how to understand.
Mm-hmm.
And so kids are really good at imitating behavior.
Yeah, that's really good.
And they'll do that before they're even able to fully understand what it is that you want them to do or how you want them to be.
Yep.
Like you said, they may not understand what respect is, but they are able to identify the feeling of being respected.
Yes. Yep.
And they can reciprocate that before they're able to even articulate what that means.
Right. Yeah. And that's so often the case, like you said, with kids, that they can imitate before actually understanding.
Mm-hmm.
And with Nora, she does that all the time, where she'll like say a really big word.
Yeah.
And she used to do it more, and now she just understands more. But where she would say like a big word, like, I don't know, we'll just take ridiculous, for example, just say like, oh, that is so ridiculous. And we're like, is it?
Yeah.
Like, never heard you say that word before. And she'll be like, well, yeah, what does it mean? But she'll use it appropriately because she's understanding the context of it.
Yeah.
But she doesn't actually know the true meaning of it. And so she's using it right, technically, but also not in the way that she's using it without having an understanding of it. Yeah.
Yep. Yeah. She has done that probably 100 times.
Yep.
She'll use a big word. And then sometimes she'll just on her own, she'll be like, without even us asking, she'll say a big word and then she'll be like, what does that mean again?
Yep.
But you're right. And she usually uses it in the right context. Because kids can imitate before they can understand.
Yeah.
And so, for that reason, to come back to what you originally said, we need to become the very thing that we intend to lead other people into, especially with parenting.
Right.
We need to become people of peace before we can expect our kids to live in peace.
Yeah.
And back to culture and developing culture, that if we're going to develop a culture in our home that reflects God's kingdom, I would say there are 3 things that we need to do. The first thing we need to do is we need to get close enough to Jesus to where we can identify his values.
Right.
And we need to clearly perceive him, his character, his nature.
Yeah.
Right? What was he like? How did he treat people? What was important to him? And if we can answer those questions, we'll be able to identify his values.
Right.
The second thing we have to do is assess our own values and say, okay, here's what was important to Jesus. He valued rest. He valued serving.
Yeah.
He valued, whatever it is. And so then we can look at our lives and say, okay, are these lining up? Is there consistency between what we value and what Jesus values?
Yeah.
But again, you can't just go off of the knowledge or desire of what should be or what ought to be. You have to honestly assess the reality of what is.
Right. Yep.
And that's such an important part because it's really easy to say, well, I understand intellectually that we ought to be people of peace.
Sure.
And so I'm going to claim that.
Yeah.
Or I understand that we ought to be joyful. We ought to value rest. Spending time with the family is a good thing.
Yeah.
It doesn't sound good to not say that.
Right.
So my language is going to reflect that. But what we have to consider is, does our time and our energy,
Yep.
The way we're spending our resources, does that reflect the reality that we actually have value for the same things that Jesus valued?
Right. Yeah.
And if not, there's that discrepancy. So that's the second thing. And the third thing we have to do is, if we come to realize that there are things that Jesus values that we have not yet ascribed value to in our own lives, we need to ask the question, not just what can I do to bring value to what Jesus valued, but what value has taken its place in our own hierarchy of value that needs to be devalued to make space for what Jesus valued to be brought up.
Right. Yeah. And those things aren't always going to be negative things either.
Sure.
It might be something that's good and something that you can
Yes.
continue working towards,
Yep.
but something that doesn't need to be held at such a high importance as it is at the time.
Yep.
Yeah.
And let's bring this back to something we talked about last week, that in the hierarchy of values, the more you're willing to sacrifice one for the sake of the other, the lower it will move in the hierarchy. And the more you are unwilling to say no, the higher it moves up.
Yeah.
Oftentimes, I've used this example in the past. Oftentimes, so we have a value for humor. We love to laugh. With our friends, we laugh constantly.
Yeah,
We're
all the
always
time.
laughing. We're telling jokes. But I believe that Jesus probably had a value for humor.
Yeah,
I think he was
I think
probably
so.
really fun to be around. But you have to consider, where did his value for humor, where would that have fallen in his hierarchy? And in order to understand that, we have to ask the question, is there anything that he would be willing to sacrifice for the sake of telling a joke? And so you can pit that up against, say, like honor. He was very honoring.
Yeah.
I believe that, and the Bible says in multiple places, I think John 5:19, I want to say, John 12:49 and 50, it talks about this, that everything Jesus said was what he heard the Father saying. Everything he did is what he saw the Father doing.
Yeah.
And so there was this reality that Jesus was always looking to the Father, and he always kind of had his ear bent toward his Spirit. And that was what led him. And that was how he knew what to do, is how he knew what to say.
Right. Yeah.
And so considering that honor is one of I think the foundational, pillars of God's kingdom.
Yeah.
I think
definitely.
it's an incredibly high value in his kingdom. And so I look at Jesus and I think you probably valued humor. I think you like to have fun and joke around with your disciples.
Yeah.
But I highly doubt that you were willing to tell a joke at the expense of honor. Right. And so you look at those things, and oftentimes, like you said, humor is not a bad thing.
Right.
We have comedians that we like. We joke around with our kids.
Right.
I feel like it feels like somebody's always laughing in our house.
Yeah.
And so it's not a bad thing to have a value for humor, but you just have to ask the question, are there things that I'm willing to sacrifice for the sake of humor that will come at the expense of our ability to create a culture in our home that reflects God's kingdom?
Yeah.
And if that's true, then that is valued too high. Humor is valued too high, and we've got to rein it back.
Right.
And we need to devalue that a little bit so that we can put honor back in its place.
Right. It's so much more important for somebody to walk away feeling loved.
Yeah.
Rather than put down for the sake of a funny joke or a funny moment, even if they find it funny.
Right.
But it still is like a little bit of a stab.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, I would much rather have not told that joke and you walked away feeling loved rather than getting a couple good laughs.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Here is another example. I look at Jesus and what I see is peace. And even think about the story when he calmed the storm and he spoke peace to the storm.
Yeah.
Well, prior to that, he was sleeping.
Right.
Right. So there's this story where Jesus is sleeping in the boat and there's this crazy storm. The disciples are scared. They believe they're all about to die because the waves are just so intense and the wind. And so they're kind of looking around, scrambling, trying to figure out what to do. And they realize Jesus is sleeping. Like, okay, well, wake this guy up because, and
he's the guy.
He's the guy, but they're angry at him for sleeping. Yeah. They're scared. And so he kind of wakes up and he stands up and he just speaks, a word of peace to the storm and it instantly calms down and it listens and obeys him. And there's this moment where you have to realize that he was able to speak peace externally to the situation he was in because he was at peace internally. And you realize that because he was sleeping in the storm.
Yeah.
And so he wasn't scared. He knew exactly who he was. He knew exactly what was going on.
Right. Yeah. Which is wild to think about, really being putting yourself in the boat.
Yeah. Right.
And I feel like that's a really good, what is it called? Like a litmus test. Right now, I don't think that I'm at a place where I could be in a boat in the middle of a gigantic storm and be like, okay, I'm going to go take a nap.
Yeah.
To be honest, I don't think I'm there. So I feel like that's a great way to kind of test yourself and ask yourself, okay, where am I at my level of peace?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And of course, he always modeled the perfect expression of everything.
Yeah.
And so he modeled in that moment, that was the height or the peak of what peace can look like, right? Because he had peace in its fullness.
Right.
And another thing, this is maybe a bit of a rabbit trail, but the reason he had peace was because he had trust. And so Romans 15:13 says, now may the God of hope fill you with all peace and joy as you trust in him. And there's this reality that the degree to which we're willing to trust God is
Yeah.
the degree to which we have joy and peace over the situation in which we're willing to trust him or not trust him.
Right. Yeah.
And so, I've taken that to mean that a lack of joy and peace in a particular area of my life indicates that I may not be trusting him.
Mm-hmm.
And so Jesus fully trusted the Father, right? He and the Father were one, but
Right.
because he understood the character and the nature of the Father, he had no reason to doubt. He had no
Yeah.
reason to live in fear because he understood, oh, I'm safe.
Right.
And so I can be at peace because of that.
Yeah.
But anyway, so Jesus was this person who carried peace. And he said in the Sermon on the Mount, and I think this is probably Matthew 5 or 6, but he says, blessed are the peacemakers. And let's bring this back to our hierarchy of values, because I think there are different ways to have an expression for the value of peace. Now, Jesus said, blessed are the peacemakers. There's a difference between being somebody who makes peace and being somebody who has peace.
Yeah.
I think
Yep.
those are different things. Jesus was a peacemaker because he was not afraid to confront the things in his life and in the lives of those around him that would come at the expense of peace. And so he wasn't afraid of conflict.
Right.
He wasn't afraid of saying what he believed needed to be said. He wasn't afraid of speaking truth when truth needed to be spoken.
Right.
And he often offended people. Not that that was his intention.
Sure.
But there's the saying that he'll offend what's in your head to get to your heart. And so he's not afraid to offend our minds,
Right.
if it will reveal what's going on in our hearts.
Yeah.
As he often did with the Pharisees.
Right. I was about to say, any conversation with the
Yeah.
Pharisees, you can see that.
Yep. So, but because Jesus was this brave and powerful communicator, that he wasn't afraid to address chaos and dysfunction. Because of that, he was able to create peace everywhere he went.
Right.
And now the alternative to that, so I would say that Jesus, his value for being a peacemaker is very high on his hierarchy of values.
Yep.
Now, oftentimes we don't have that same value. We don't value being a peacemaker. And so that spot in our hierarchy of value that ought to be taken by the value to make peace is replaced by passivity. And on the outside, that might look the same.
Sure.
Because people who live very passively, they're not peacemakers, but they have peace. And they live passively because there are perceived values that come with living passively. And one of them is the value for having peace. Now, it's not real peace.
Right.
Not the way that Jesus had it.
No.
Because the only way to be a peacemaker and to actually be a person who lives in the most authentic and genuine version of peace is to be one who is not afraid to address the things that would come at the expense of peace.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Not afraid to have those tough conversations of saying like, hey, I'm seeing this going on and I just needed to bring it to your attention because you may not, giving you the benefit of the doubt, you may not be aware, but this is what I'm seeing, having those tough conversations rather than just allowing that to go on for the sake of not having conflict surrounding you.
Right.
And really like, I feel like even when you're like keeping that peace for yourself, that's actually not even happening either.
Yeah.
Really, you're just avoiding conflict.
Yeah.
That's the only thing going on, because if you see something, I'll think pop to my head. If you see something, say something.
Yeah.
But if you
Which
see
is
something,
a Brooklyn Nine-Nine reference.
Yes.
We can't just leave that hanging.
that's true.
Brooklyn Nine-Nine is one of the funniest TV shows in the
amazing.
world. And so that was a reference to that.
Shout out to all you Brooklyn Nine-Niners.
Yep.
But anyways, back to it. If you see something and it's like brought to your attention that this is an issue and you don't say something, I'm having a really hard time really collecting myself now because I just want to keep. But that conflict is going to be in yourself, whether you're going to be wrestling with that of, okay, I know I should say something, but I really don't want to because it could be such an awkward conversation. And, you put yourself in this place of, okay, I'm just going to let them be, I'm going to let them keep their peace.
Right. You don't want to disturb the peace.
Yes.
So I'm going to passively do nothing.
Right.
And often in doing so, you you're unable to actually solve any kind of problem or resolve any kind of conflict.
Mm-hmm.
And so you see that in people they have relationships, whether it's a friendship or, a husband and wife, whatever that looks like. Often there is some kind of conflict there. And in order to keep the peace, people will also often live passively, when what needs to happen is we need to address the conflict.
Right.
And say, hey, I've noticed this, like you said, or hey, I've been feeling this way.
Mm-hmm.
And actually look for ways to resolve that. And in doing so, you will have opportunities to create a far more authentic experience of peace in your life and in your relationships,
right,
than if you were to just live passively.
Mm-hmm. Yes, because when you're able to have those conversations, there may be a momentary unrest feeling or unrestful feeling in you of like, okay, well, how, just that the conversation build up in your mind of like, okay, well, I'll say it this way, and then hopefully they'll feel this way. You're having the conversation in your mind before you're actually having it.
Mm-hmm.
But that's a very brief discomfort feeling for the sake of establishing a value of clear communication and honesty with that person that you're in relationship with. Because I feel like once that passive aggressive wall is broken down, it brings so much freedom in the relationship that you have with that person, because they're like, oh, they were bold enough to bring this to me. And so they may feel empowered then to have conversations with you that they were nervous about having to. And so it just creates way healthier of a relationship there, and allows that culture between those two people or however many people to flourish and have just so much more open communication.
Yeah. Well, and being brave enough to be honest with people about how you're feeling, about how you're experiencing them.
Yeah.
And doing that you're right. That's how that is the way towards creating a culture in which there is actual peace.
Mm-hmm.
And I think about like my friendships, I'd say the guy that I'm closest to, the guy who I would consider my best friend, who I talk to pretty much every day.
Yeah.
He and I have had really, really hard and honest conversations in the past.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the reason that confrontation is so necessary is that, unless we're willing to confront the things that are allowing resentment to be built up, or bitterness, or any kind of disconnection or distance, unless we're willing to confront those things, chances are they'll keep growing, right? And creating more distance and more separation. And so the thing is, like, I'm most willing to confront hard things with people that I love for the sake of love.
Yes.
And it's not like, hey, here's what I hate about you.
Right.
It's like, hey, I'm experiencing this, or I've been feeling this way.
Yeah.
And I'm telling you this because I love you too much to let any kind of resentment in me start to build towards you. Because what I want is connection. And what I want is healthy relationship.
Yes.
And so I'm going to confront this thing, and I'm going to address this and bring it to you, but it's because I love you. If I didn't care about you, I probably wouldn't say anything.
Exactly. Yeah.
Right.
That's like, and I feel like people confuse that way too often.
Yes.
People being me also for the longest time, where it was like, okay, I'm not going to bring up any issues that I have with you because I love you. But then it was like, oh, but I actually can't have a relationship with you because I'm so afraid that I'm going to slip up and accidentally say one of the things that I don't, that I don't enjoy.
Right.
And so there's just, that creates like this huge, like, canyon between you and the person that you're trying to have this relationship with, because it's like, okay, I feel like I'm loving you well by not bringing these things up, but actually, in reality, I'm just creating this huge rift in what could be a very healthy relationship, just for, just with having those conversations that feel so uncomfortable in the moment. But then after they're done, it's like you're breathing new air. It's amazing.
Yep. Yeah. So intentionality isn't required to build culture. But if there's a culture that you have in mind that you want to go after, you want to cultivate and develop, you're going to have to be really intentional in going about that.
Right.
And so if, if you're like us and you think, okay, I like what Jesus is doing. Like, he's got a good way of doing things. I want to model my life after that.
Yep.
And I look at God's kingdom and I think the way things are done in his kingdom and in his realm are how I want things done in my own life and in my home. you will have to be really intentional.
Yes.
Intentional in identifying what does the Father value?
Mm-hmm.
What are the values that the culture of his kingdom are built upon? How did Jesus live? Look at our own lives and say, is there some kind of a disconnect between what I value and what Jesus valued?
Yeah.
And if so, what are the values that I have set up in my own life that are coming at the expense of my ability to develop a kingdom culture in my life and in my home?
Yeah.
And I think if we are intentional in doing those things, then I think we'll be able to cultivate something really amazing.
Yeah. Agreed.
Okay. I think that feels good for this episode.
Sounds good.
All right. Well, that is it for this week. Once again, my name is Brian.
And I'm Katie.
And we're making history. We'll see you next time.